Welcome everyone to our webinar today, sponsored by Cast Professional Publishing. We are thrilled to have Katie Novak. Many of you may know Katie or know of her. Those that don't, just quickly, Katie is a rock star in the UDL universe. She's a dynamic educator, school administrator in the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District in Massachusetts, 14 years of teaching and administration, and earned doctorate in curriculum and teaching, and 3 books published with Cast Professional Publishing. UDL in the Cloud, which is a fabulous book. Universally Designed Classroom. This is co-authored with Kristen Rodriguez. UDL in the Cloud with Tom Thibodeau. And then UDL Now is also just a tremendous book, and this is the revised and expanded edition. Katie went back last year after 2 years and really rewrote a significant amount of the content and expanded it by about 20%. So it's a much bigger book, more detailed, covers more grade levels, and really responds to a lot of the feedback that she got over 2 years from all of you in the field. It's a great example of progress monitoring and formative assessment and revising based on that feedback. So a great model for us, and without further ado, I will turn you over to the person you really want to hear from, and that's Katie. However, before I do that, I just want to say, if you want any of these books today at a special discount, go to castpublishing.org, and you'll find a place there to order the books. Use the coupon code KATIE, K-A-T-I-E, and you'll get 20% off of those books. You can also get them through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, for EPUBs. You can get them through all the usual Kobo books and all those usual outlets as well. So, but get these books. Everybody should have them on their shelf or on their EPUB device, and they're great. And over to you, Katie.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to move over to share my screen in a moment, but I wanted everyone to see that I'm a real person here. And that I'm here today at my house. I took the day off for this special occasion, and what did I do on my day off? I read peer-reviewed research and worked on a manuscript for something else, a next UDL book I'm working on. So this is how I spend my days off, no pedicures for me. So just to kind of start off, I would love to go through a presentation to share what is new and fun about the new version of UDL Now, and how you can apply it in your learning environment regardless of where you're at. If you're a teacher from pre-K up until higher ed, whether you're an administrator, whether you're working for a nonprofit or another education institution, UDL is really the best way to ensure that all learners are becoming self-directed, creative problem solvers, and that they're really engaged in what they're doing. And so that's really the mission for us all, is how do we get learners to really own their learning? And so to go on here, the goals and objectives of today is I want to start with the why. And this is Simon Sinek's golden circle, which he talks about really successful businesses always start asking why. And if you think about traditional education, we almost start from the outside and go in. There's almost this perception with what do we teach? And so whenever we talk about what's happening in classrooms, it's, well, what do we do? Okay, well, we educate kids. Or what do we teach? Oh, I teach American Lit, or I teach 3rd grade, or I teach AP Chemistry, or I teach physical education. And then the next step is, okay, I know what I'm teaching and what I'm doing, and how am I gonna do it? And that's when we really think about, oh, okay, I'm gonna design the lessons, and I'm gonna create these assessments. And what we really should be starting with here is, why do we have school? Why are we educating kids? And that's the core of our experience. If we know why we're doing it, we're gonna come up with much more progressive, innovative ways for how we're going to meet these goals. And then lastly, we can think about, okay, now that we know how to create this really innovative space and we know why we're doing it, what is it that is the content and the skills that are so important. And that's the what of learning. And so I want to kind of go through the same thing with us, is to start off with why UDL is necessary. It's so tempting to want to jump in and say, well, what is UDL and how do I do it? But the most important thing is, why are we doing it? Why are we transforming education from what it currently is? And so I want you to think about that. And then the next thing is, I would love for you to have this aha moment where you're trying to make meaning of everything that we're talking about. And you're like, hey, like I understand something about UDL, or I have a new resource now that I didn't have before. And then lastly, we do want to have some action and expression. We do want to start this UDL movement to start making changes for learners. And so I want you to think about what's going to be your next step and how are you going to continue on your UDL journey. And so when we think about adding up together the why and the what and the how, we end up with expert learners. And expert learners are not good students. They don't equate to one another. And so a lot of the time in schools, we want students to be good students. We want them to get good grades. We want them to do well on assessments. But somebody who does well on assessments or has good grades is not necessarily an expert learner. An expert learner is really someone who knows why they're doing what they're doing. They're very, very goal-directed. And they know that whatever is out there that they're trying to reach, it's going to be rigorous. Okay, things that are worth achieving in our world are hard to get. Otherwise, we would all be doing them. And so this whole idea of, I know why I'm doing it, and I also know that it's going to be worth my time and my effort. I also know all of the resources and the knowledge that I'm going to have to find in order to get what I need, the information and resources that I'm going to need to be able to reach that goal. And lastly, how am I going to get there? And so I want you to start with the why and think about, why are you here today on this webinar? And you can either go into Twitter, you could put it in the chat box. If you're watching this with your colleagues, you can just talk about it or think about it. And I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds in general to think, why are you here? And this is not necessarily an existential question, but why are you interested in UDL? And generally, if you're thinking about UDL implementation, it's because there's something that you want to change. The UDL implementation system starts with, there is a need for change, that not all students are engaged, or not everybody in your staff is, interested or open to transforming and teaching and learning. And so if you could just give us some of the reasons why you're here, that would be great to give us some background. Now, the next step is to talk about this idea of, if there's a need for change, it means that we're not there yet. None of us are where we want to be yet. And the magical thing about learning is we probably will never be in the place that we want to be. And so when we're thinking about the fact that not all students are experiencing success, I hear a lot of, as I'm kind of traveling around, I really want all students to do this, but some of them can't. Students can't make these decisions. And you hear this classification based on any number of reasons. So it could be, well, they're too young to make these decisions, or they don't have the ability, or they're too, they've experienced too much trauma. And what we have to realize is that anyone can become an expert learner. Anyone can become self-directed and creative and a problem solver and to go after their goals. And anyone who is not doing it is just not doing it yet. And so I like to think about just the analogy in general of skiing, because I am not a skier. I live in Massachusetts. I am very close to New Hampshire, which is like the motherland of the Northeast as far as skiing goes. And I just don't ski. And so you could technically, if you're a skier, you could you could invite me to ski. And I'm kind of a yes woman. I would probably go. And the thing is if you tried to take me up to this very scary double black diamond ski slope, you would watch me ski and you would say, oh my gosh, she can't ski. Like, that's 100% what you say, and I promise you that I would follow through on that. You'd be like, she can't ski. This is so boring. This is so bad. And when we start to implement UDL in a learning environment, and we are suddenly asking students to make choices for themselves, or we're asking them to give feedback to us, or we're asking them to reflect on what they need, it's kind of like taking me to the top of a mountain, in that there's a very good chance that the first time you do it, or the first 50 times you do it, or maybe even the first 100 times you do it, you're going to say, oh gosh, they can't do this. But the magic is the journey, in that everyone is able to accomplish anything with the right scaffolding and the right practice and the commitment and the motivation. And I hear this from administrators a lot too, is we think about UDL as being this really progressive, transformational, innovative practice. And sometimes I'll hear from administrators and they'll say, oh, well, those teachers, they won't do it. I'm not gonna be able to get them to do it. And it's the same lens, is that all teachers are capable of implementing UDL into its full fidelity. If they're not doing it, they're just not doing it yet, because their professional learning has not been structured in a way to get the engagement, to get the buy-in, to build the motivation, and then to give them the resources and information they need to be able to start to implement it in their own practice. Because just as students are widely variable, so are our teachers. And we have to value everyone from their starting point and realize that there's absolute strategies that we can implement to alter that trajectory. And we may have to take them skiing, 50 times. And that's kind of the magic of the journey, is that when we stick together, we will get there. And so I want you to think about that power of yet. And again, that is language that comes from Carol Dweck, who does amazing research on growth mindset. And this whole idea of just saying, I can do it already, or I can't do it yet, really starts to change our thinking about what is possible. Now, when you think about engagement, what we're really looking for this, in order to believe, like, I'm not doing it now, but I will be doing it, you have to have engagement. And engagement is really about equal parts attention and commitment. And it's really easy to try to think about UDL as almost like a party trick of doing something fun at the beginning of the period and getting students' attention. Or, of having, a little break in the middle of a PD session and getting people's attention. And getting people's attention is very important. You need to do that. But it's also, you have to make sure that they're highly committed. And if you look at the visual there, this is some research by Rios, is you look at engagement as being equal parts attention and commitment, and then you see the downward slide. And what happens is you can still be very compliant and be paying attention, but that commitment isn't there to do whatever it takes to get there after the situation is like managed for you. And then you get to a point where you're just not committed to doing that at all. And eventually you're going to pull away, and then you're going to rebel, or you're going to be fresh. And if you think about even, the kids with the most emotional disabilities, Ross Green, who wrote Lost at School, he talks about the fact that all students would be engaged if they could. That students who misbehave or rebel, it's because they lack the coping skills to be able to attend or commit. And UDL engagement, the guidelines actually speak directly to the fact that we have to teach students how to maintain effort and persistence. And also we have to have them experience opportunities to learn how to cope and self-regulate. And so if you look at the 4 bullets on the right of your screen, you're gonna see that slide. Like, people who are engaged are like, yes, like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna stick with it even when it's challenging. And that doesn't, again, equate to, yes, I'm really good at it yet, but I'm really interested in the journey. And then I'm compliant, like, oh my gosh, like, this UDL thing sounds like a really good idea. And I'm gonna go to the PD and I'm gonna join the PLC, but like, I'm not gonna spend my time like on a Friday night, like reading the research, and, I'm not going to go in the summer to a PD. Like, that's like compliance, and that's, very high attention, but, not super high commitment. And then you move into like, oh gosh, this either sounds like it's not for me, like it sounds like it's going to decrease rigor, I don't want to have anything to do with it, and that's obviously not this audience because you're here, or it's just that I don't know how to do it. That feeling of being overwhelmed sometimes is what students cannot cope with. And then lastly, it's this, oh my word, I cannot deal with these feelings at all, so now I'm going to start being like fresh. And rebellion for adults doesn't look necessarily like rebellion for kids, because often adults have, a few more tools to help them cope. But the idea of, being in a situation where you just feel so silly or so overwhelmed that you kind of start distracting yourself. So think about something that makes you want to rebel. And again, we're not talking about absolutely going out of control here. But if you think about, like, if I were to sit, for instance, in a graduate calculus course, I would be so uncomfortable that I would probably start, making jokes and looking on Twitter and doing things like that. And it's because I don't know calculus yet. and I am fully capable of learning calculus, but right now it's something that would make me a little bit uncomfortable if I didn't have a lot of options to really break it down and scaffold. So think about being put in a class or being put in a situation. My mom always uses the term, it makes me feel silly. And think about something that you just know that if you were to be put in a situation where you had to do this thing or learn about this thing, you would be trying to pay attention to something else. And again, you can let us know on Twitter. You can put it in the chat box. I would love to hear what some of these things are that we would possibly be rebelling against. As a next step, when you think about the UDL guidelines, what you want to look at is this idea that all of them really talk to options. We have to give students options, and we have to allow them to make choices when we give them options. And so often we end up in situations where we provide options, but then we don't give students the choice. And sometimes this is where we get confused between what is the difference between universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. And both of them are frameworks that allow teachers to differentiate or provide options. But if you go into the research on differentiated instruction, they do talk a lot about this idea of like this top-down teaching technique, or putting students in groups based on labels. And in really the most effective differentiated instruction, these labels are very, very flexible. And that we're thinking about, okay, these students here don't understand this concept, and so I am going to give them something else. And that's a really good way for students to master knowledge, and it's a good way to master content, because I'm going to take all of these kids over who are struggling and I'm going to make sure they have the content. The issue with that, and where it does not provide students with choices nor really activate the effective network, is that students aren't going through the really important process of going through the self-assessment, of thinking about, do I need that additional support? You know, how do I ask for it? They don't have to go through the process of the struggle to really grapple with, you know, advocating and what do I need and how do I learn this in a more effective way? Because a lot of the times when we bring those students to the side, we teach them how to do things in one way. And so although it's an option, there's still not a lot of choice. And so when you're thinking about the difference, both of them do provide options, but UDL is very much directed by the students, whereas differentiated instruction is still largely directed by teachers, and saying like, oh, I'm going to give these students this easier text. And I mean, I taught up until 3 years ago and actually had a textbook that was aligned to differentiated instruction that had tips on the side in the teacher's guide that said, do this for your pre-AP students and do this for your struggling readers. And those are different options for learning, but those students don't have a choice. And so when you're thinking about giving your learners options, and it could be your teachers or it could be your students, what is the barrier that's preventing you from doing that? And be self-reflective yourself, and don't be like nervous about sharing what that is, because being vulnerable shows a lot of strength to say, you know what, like I have a really hard time doing that, maybe because I have a difficult time thinking about how I can allow students to make choices, because I just fear that they're going to make the wrong choices. They're going to choose the easy thing. And regardless of what you say, there's definite strategies that you can use to, you know, combat that and to eliminate that barrier. So for example, in UDL, there are no easy choices. That every option or every choice really allows students to meet the intended outcome. And so it requires you going back to like, what are your goals? Is if I really want my students to know about, you know, a character, like let's say I want them to know about Huck Finn. And the whole purpose is I want them to understand how Huck Finn, you know, develops over the course of the book based on the setting, how characters and setting interact, for example. I might say, okay, so you can either, you know, read the excerpt from the Mark Twain text. You can read this chapter here in the Cliff Notes. You can come over here and I'll explain it to you. There's a movie, you can watch it at home. And then you're going to share back to me how the setting and the characters interact. And you can do that in a traditional essay, or you can do that by, you know, putting on like a skit, or you can do that by creating like a visual infographic, or you can make Huck Finn out of clay. Now, Huck Finn out of clay is not an appropriate option because it doesn't allow students to meet the intended goal. And so I see a lot of these menus of options saying, oh, you can do a poster or you can make this out of clay. And sometimes that's just not appropriate. And so it's important to know that if you feel the barrier is there's an easy choice, it just is a little bit more self-reflection when creating those options to determine, will this authentic product really allow me to know whether or not the student met the goal? And so I'm looking right now through some of the things that you've given me, and it talks about some of the barriers are common assessments. Some of the barriers are pacing guides, lack of planning time, lack of materials. Talks about this whole idea. And what I would say is none of those things have to be barriers if a district takes the time to step back and think about how can you universally design those. So for example, a pacing guide could be based on standards. And so you're saying, okay, during this week, we have to make sure that all students can, multiply fractions. And during the next week, we have to make sure that all of them can do this. And then when groups of teachers together can come together and say, okay, let's create a common assessment that is universally designed, then you can see that over time you can start to eliminate some of these barriers, because maybe those current common assessments that you have will prevent you from being able to provide students with all those really rich options. So why is this so critical? Why are we hammering engagement and self-direction? And this actually was just published in NPR last month, and you can actually click on the link and go to the actual article. But it talks about, in the future, why these skills are so critical. And this article does not in any way, shape, or form mention universal design for learning. But I read it and thought it was a perfect advertisement for it. Because that top line there, it's a blue line if you can see in color, and the top line is non-routine cognitive jobs. And basically a non-routine cognitive job is one that requires self-direction, critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving. The job is different every day. We are all in non-routine cognitive jobs. And so we're required to do a lot of things on our own because there's not somebody there telling us exactly what to do. There's no protocol for exactly how we need to follow directions. Teaching and learning are largely personalized. And so if you look at that line back in 1985, there were as many jobs that were actually routine cognitive jobs. And these are jobs that you're going to always have someone telling you what to do. So you think about a secretary, it's largely, every day is the to-do list is based on, what the administrator provides as this is what you're going to do today. There's a lot of questioning, well, how do I do this? And then, somebody who is in a superior position will say, oh, this is how you're going to do it. Or manufacturing jobs, which are largely routine, where you're doing the same thing every day. Now, what's scary about this graphic from the UDL lens is that the people at the top are getting so creative that they are developing solutions that are eliminating all of those jobs in the middle. And what we are going to end up with ultimately is, if this trend continues, it's going to be a have and a have-not scenario. Whereas if students learn that success is following directions and doing what you're told and thinking that there's only one way to do something and only being able to express your knowledge in really concrete, non-authentic ways, like being able to take a multiple choice test, what's going to happen is they're not even going to have the opportunity to be in those jobs at the top. And so school becomes not so much about mastery of content and mastery of knowledge, but a mastery of learning. Because then a person who is an expert learner and a master of learning will always be able to find the resources and information they need in order to meet their goals in whatever job they choose. And so I just think this is really interesting to look at just what's happening literally in the economy, and the fact that those jobs at the top, if we jump ahead 10 years, we don't even know what they're going to look like. And so preparing our kids for the future means that they have to be able to think their own way. So how do we do this in a smaller scale as we're starting in our own classrooms or in our own buildings? And one of the things that I talk about a lot in UDL Now is this idea of creating choice assignments. That's in chapter 7, where we allow our students to express knowledge in endless ways. And so these are some examples. I'm in the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District. In my district, our teachers are absolutely amazing in their implementation of UDL. We've gone through the Explore and the Prepare phase phase. Right now, we're integrating UDL as a district, and I would say that many teachers are on the way to scaling and optimizing. But these are just some examples of what teachers have done to provide students with more opportunities to be self-directed and creative and to kind of create their own path. And so in the top left-hand corner over here, this is one of my science teachers at the middle school. She was doing, the goal was that they understand convection currents. And it used to be a test. And instead, students had an option to explain all the different properties of convection currents in a way that was more engaging and appropriate to them. And these two gentlemen here were doing their convection current rap. And so they did a whole performance, and all students had the same rubric. So whether you were writing the paper or taking the test, you still had to identify all the different properties. You had to explain the end results of convection currents, the process. And they were able to do this by having a blast doing a rap. In the middle, these boys are in a fourth grade classroom where you look at even just the environment for how you're going to work is very, very Google Office. Whereas when they're working, they can choose to sit on a stool or a comfy chair, or you can see there's a ball. In the back, there's noise canceling headphones, an opportunity to listen to the books on audio if you don't want to read. You can see magazines. You can see, that they have the opportunities for Chromebooks. And this is in a fourth grade class where truly they are allowed to find their own space to decrease any barriers to learning to be able to learn. Over here, this is a high school class where students were handing in a project instead of doing the traditional book report. As you can see, some of them made board games, some of them created infographics, some of them wrote more traditional papers or poetry. Again, over here is an example of a class that they had to talk about the solar system, and they could do it in a skit or a model. The idea of doing visual notes instead of notes. So a lot of teachers, when you're looking at history and DBQs and things like that, which is a document-based question, we ask students, you have to do Cornell notes, you have to do T notes. And although those are really valuable scaffolds, those are not the best things for all learners. And so that's why it comes back to, here are some options for note-taking. The goal is that you're going to be able to learn this information. And here's some really great ways that you could try. Now, I want to show you, this is a product for one of our students. It's a visual poem. We changed our summer reading, and I want to show you the summer reading assignment because I'm so proud of the teachers in the district for doing this. Are you still seeing the window here?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So our entire English department in Groton Regional, and I do have permission to share this. If you click on that top right-hand picture here, that has a link when you have the webinar at home. And what you'll see is that they decided that, I said, what's the goal of summer reading? And they're like, we want them to love the English language arts experience. We want them to have this robust experience. And so instead of saying, okay, you're going to read these Shakespeare novels, they came up with these alternatives to say, our goal is that they interact with language. And so what does that mean? And so they have these options here for instance, reading. And you can talk about all these different things you can do for reading. And so you can see, like, read to a blind person. And then there's the link for the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. How do you volunteer to read in a pediatric waiting room? It goes on to talk about all of these different things they can do for writing. And one of the writing pieces was a visual poem, but it has these amazing things like slow journalism. And again, they have these resources where if I want to do slow journalism, I might go to this link and see, well, what is slow journalism? Write a graphic novel about a vacation, fan fiction. This one I would have totally done in high school. Use a fortune inside a fortune cookie to start or end a story or a song, or to caption a drawing. And so we have all of these ways that we can play and embrace language. And so one of the students, if you think about a traditional summer reading assignment and the quality of assignment that you get, I would love you to see what one of our high school students decided to create for her project. Okay, hold on, I'm coming here.
I want to live in a world that's new and exciting, where people are unique and places are inviting, and the misfortunes and hardships that we face today are no longer obstacles that can stand in our way. Where those who live with disabilities of the mind receive love and respect and are treated so kind, because although on the outside it may not always show, they are real and often more difficult than you know. But gender, sexuality, religion, or race are not characteristics that determine your place in social, economic, and political classes. The nature of your soul will diverge you from the masses. Where the pay of a woman is the same as a man, and we learn to help others whenever we can, so that no person is ever left on the streets but given clothes for their back and shoes for their feet. Where we join together to protect our one planet, to combat all the issues that currently span it, like the silent climate change and bad air pollution. Together we can establish a permanent solution. Where dreadful news stories are not the most prominent, and a gun isn't needed to assert any dominance, so any person can feel safe wherever they go, and the unity of our people will continue to grow. Child who lives without opportunity gets the help they need to thrive in their community, and those who are trapped in a dangerous way of life are helped to escape and use words, not a knife. Where poverty and hunger are erased and removed because we know quality of life must be improved, and access to good food and clean water is given so that no one must endure poor living conditions. Where girls are no longer kept from their education but taught everything they need for a strong foundation, so they can become our next world leaders and teachers and disprove those who said it's not worth it to teach her. The bigger, broader issues are what plague us the most, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to get close, because no matter what anybody else might say, any small effort counts at the end of the day.
And so you think about, again, your traditional summer reading assignments, and that is just one of hundreds of really beautiful things. But I think that speaks to the power of UDL, and that really challenging students to be self-directed, to be creative, and to let them navigate that in their own way. I wouldn't be able to teach a student how to do that. And so a lot of the time when you're thinking about, oh my gosh, how do I do all these options, we as educators worry about, well, I'm not going to be able to help them if they do a skit, or I'm not going to be able to help them if they decide to do it that way. But that's the magic, is allowing them to own their own journey. And again, always bringing them back to that, the goal of the lesson. So I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint here. And there is a couple of different, for some reason, I don't know, are you able to just see the, oh, my screen's sharing, it's being silly. So I'm seeing a couple different questions come up on Twitter, and there's one that I definitely want to address, because someone talked about the barriers are like internal and external racism. And one of the interesting things that you can definitely look at if you're thinking about, gosh, there's just more problems with equity than what's happening in the classroom, is to look at the integrative comprehensive systems with Elise Frattura. And they provide a framework for implementing UDL as a third cornerstone on a journey that starts with a focus on equity and an equity audit, which really asks all educators to think about their own identity and how your identity development might be impacting students. And so that's a really great resource if you're feeling like you need almost a step back to focus on UDL. So diving in again to the presentation is what's the best way that we can begin to do that? How can we do our absolute best to ensure that we're starting in the right place? And to do that, I want you to think about this idea of using feedback to inform instruction. And this right here, this is a graphic from Thanks for the Feedback. From Thanks for the Feedback by Stone and Heen wrote it, but this is from the Triad Consulting Group. And they're saying that a lot of us are not receptive to feedback because we fall into one of these different quadrants. And so if you think about when we ask for feedback, how do we do today? Or when we get an evaluation back from our evaluators for teacher evaluation, you're basically almost hoping that it's going to be positive. And yet positive feedback is actually not really, it's not really conducive for growth or improvement. And so there's three different types of feedback. There's praise, there's mastery-oriented feedback or coaching, and then there's evaluation. And when we think of those three types of feedback, the two most common in schools are certainly praise and evaluation. We're very good at telling kids, oh, you did so great, I love that you did that, oh my gosh, you're so awesome. And we're really good at evaluation, putting grades on things and stickers and saying that's right or that's wrong or that's 85% or that's 2 out of 10. But this idea of mastery-oriented feedback or coaching in the middle is something where we really need to focus, because the purpose of praise is really to increase motivation, to make people feel good. But it doesn't increase performance, because if you tell me I'm really good at something, I'm just going to keep doing that. And so you don't get improvement, and something could be awesome, but you're not going to see it get better. And by the same token, evaluation, it helps me a little bit with self-reflection. Like, okay, I realize where I'm at right now on the rubric, but I don't know, how do I get to that next step? And so why don't we give more feedback? And there's this perception that mastery-oriented feedback is negative. And so if you look at this graphic here, it talks about negative recovery. And when you get feedback that in some way says there's something about you that needs to change, how long do you hold on to that? Is it like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, no big deal? Or is it like, oh my gosh, like this changes everything. Like I love reading to the class, and there's how it's so awful. I feel like they just hate me as a teacher. I've done this for 10 years. And that's not what mastery-oriented feedback is. It's really about, can you take it, reflect on it, and then apply it so you can improve? And so think about where you're at in this quadrant here. And the interesting thing, Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability. And she says vulnerability, there's this big paradox, because we tell students all the things they're not doing right. But as educators, I would say, the culture of education in the country is we're not super receptive of hearing what we're doing wrong. There's this perception that, we're doing everything right. And the thing is if students are not all becoming expert learners, we are not doing everything we can at every single level, including myself, to make sure that they are. And so there's things that all of us could be doing better. And I want to know what those things are. And so, I always tell my staff, like, if I don't know about it, I can't fix it. And so you have to be able to tell me. And that I've gotten to a place in my career where I'm on that line where, of course, I'm always hopeful it's going to be more positive than negative, but I really love when I hear something negative, because it gives me a goal to get better. And so when you're asking your student for feedback, you want to create a culture where they're comfortable giving you mastery-oriented feedback. Because if you just say, like, how do you like this lesson, or do you like this class, most kids are either going to say, they're going to give you praise and be like, yes, you're my favorite teacher ever, but there's still things you could do to be stronger. And one great thing that I like to ask when I teach graduate courses, or my teacher, I would say, okay, regardless of how you feel about me, maybe you think I'm your favorite person you've ever met, but if somebody had like a little tiny like devil on their shoulder, what would that devil say about me? They'd say, oh gosh, she would be better if, or imagine if she tried this. And that's a really cool prompt to say, okay, so after this test, if someone did really poorly on this unit, what is one reason why you think they did poorly? Or what is one thing I could do better? And so starting to create more mechanisms for students or staff to give you authentic feedback about what is it that you could be doing better, so they could be doing better. Because as administrators, the goal is, are our teachers effective? And as teachers, the goal is, are our students effective? And we do that in partnership with stakeholders like parents and the community and the school board. But if we're not willing to have those difficult conversations about what are we doing that's preventing that forward motion, then it's going to be a heck of a long journey to try to figure it out ourselves. So having these multiple perspectives is really valuable. So taking the time for a second and thinking about, how do you currently collect student feedback to inform your instruction? And again, just think about it for a second or tweet it. And while you're doing that, I'm going to try to make this screen maximized again. Okay, so a question that everybody is talking about. First of all, people are asking if they can get a copy of the video and the document, and that is absolutely, I can share those. I will make sure that CAST has them to kind of post. I'll give you the links to both of those. Also, it says, our students want to be told what to do and how. How do we teach self-direction? And this is a question that's awesome, and it goes back to the yet. Is they want to be told what to do because they don't have the skills yet to be able to self-direct. And a lot of this is a process of starting very, very small, making small choices and scaffolding up. And so in the book UDL Now, it talks about like how you can scaffold students to a point where at first they're only making small decisions and eventually they're making bigger decisions. And the whole idea is that in order to be self-directed, you do want to have to start out with some sort of framework in your mind. So if you take cooking, for example, and you want to create a recipe, Gordon Ramsay, who is, a master chef, a top chef, he doesn't use a recipe to cook a pie, but at one point, he probably looked at a recipe to cook a pie. And so it's almost like need to know the rules before you break them. And so this whole idea of how can we start students off where we're saying, okay, so today we'll make a decision, and then tomorrow you're going to be choosing this, and then the next day you're going to be choosing this. We have to know that they are going to fail a lot on that journey, and we have to celebrate that failure. And that's the really hard thing, is that as the skiing analogy at the beginning of the webinar, is it takes a while to learn how to make effective decisions. And we have to know that it's a journey and realize that it's going to take a long time, because the first 50 times that you provide choices, students may not make the best options for themselves. They might not make the best choice. And we have to work really hard to say that we owe it to them to get them to the point when they can, because the alternative is a no or much fewer options in their future. And again, there's specific skills, and that comes back to the UDL guidelines, like self-reflection. Like, it's really hard to make good choices if you don't have an opportunity to self-reflect. So we can scaffold what it means to self-reflect. At the end of every test, we can say, what is one thing that you think you did really well and why, and you could teach the class? What is one thing you didn't really understand? What is one thing I did really well as a teacher in this lesson? What is one thing that I really botched up on, or you didn't think I explained well? And then you can model self-reflection and saying, oh, wow, like, that's interesting. Aren't you guys proud of me though, that I'm working on it? And you have to create a culture where it's just you celebrate the fact that self-direction is a really amazing goal, and we need to work as hard as trying to get kids self-directed as we work on trying to get them to love Shakespeare or understand how to solve equations or be able to complete scientific experiments. Because right now, teachers are so largely focused on those actual knowledge and content standards, but in order to get them there, we need to build those other tools first. So how do we do this in a system? Because what UDL becomes in a lot of places is an opportunity to create, I would call it micro UDL. So let's say that you have a substantially separate classroom in your school, and you universally design that classroom. That's micro universal design for learning, but those students do not have the same options as all students. And so the idea of creating a universally designed system is one where truly all students have an opportunity to be in tier 1 instruction with their peers, and they have these same opportunities to become engaged, to self-reflect, to learn in a way that's meaningful for them, and to be able to express it in a way that is both accessible and meaningful. And so what we tried to do starting in 2004 is, over here we have this triangle, which is the response to intervention triangle, RTI. And the concept behind RTI is still very much alive today, in that you start off with a research-based core instruction for all students. That would be universal design for learning, which you can think about. And really high quality universal design for learning is where we took the best of tier 3 and put it in tier 1. And so all the things that we used to think of as accommodations for certain students, like graphic organizers and clarifying directions and allowing, listening to a book instead of reading it. That's just universally designed tier 1 instruction. And then at some point, based on some evidence, you would say, well, at this point, there's certain students who are going to need a one-on-one intervention or a small group intervention for social or emotional reasons, or, academic reasons. And that would happen in addition to and not instead of. And so even though the expectation in 2004 is that no student would miss out on tier 1 instruction, we all know the reality of the situation is that didn't happen. And so in 2009, we started taking the RTI triangle and encompassing it in a system. And so some districts still call it RTI, although in the new Every Student Succeeds Act, they talk about a multi-tiered system. And what that means is you take what that triangle was, the RTI, and what it stood for, that we want every student to have really high quality tier 1 instruction, knowing that some students are going to need, additional intervention at some point in addition to. You need to build these other systems around it. And so if you look at the outer circle here, in order for this to work well, in order for all students to be able to access a universal tier 1 instruction, learning and teaching and assessments have to be universally designed. They have to be really proactively designed so there are options for all kids to self-reflect and make choices for how they're going to achieve a goal. And in order for that to happen, you need to have an environment on the outside where there's really high quality, universally designed professional development, because teachers are learners and need the given the strategies for learning how to create learning and teaching and assessments that are universally designed. You also need leadership that's really committed to doing this work. And so the book that Kristen Rodriguez and I wrote, Universally Designed Leadership, is all about how do you create that system where you can, prioritize that professional development and develop an integrated and sustainable plan so you can ensure that you have everything that you need as far as resources and a vision to make sure that universal design is implemented in all areas with the ultimate goal of getting every student in Tier 1 instruction. And I like to think of the difference between RTI and MTSS, even though they're very similar and that RTI is actually encompassed, is this idea of trying to build a snowman. What we are trying to do with students in a universally designed environment is like trying to build a snowman. And right now, if you look out my window here, I can even show you if you can see me here on the thing. Right now you can see snow. That is a really good environment for building a snowman. And unfortunately, a lot of systems don't have an integrated and sustainable plan, nor an environment that really allow a snowman to stay alive. And so in Frosty the Snowman, we all remember poor Karen, that little cartoon girl. She was sick and he took her in a greenhouse when he was melting. Like, that is what is happening no matter how bad we want it. If we don't have a system in which we have all students together, we cannot give all students the opportunity to have this self-directed creative education. And so now that we've kind of gone over all of those big pieces, which are all discussed in far more detail on UDL Now with specific strategies to how to do them, I want you to choose one of these two questions to, ask me questions. And again, knowing that this is from one expert learner to another, that this is something that I am still reading about all the time. I'm still in teachers' classrooms. I still am on, number of committees in my own district asking teachers, well, what does this look like for you? And so knowing that we're all on this journey and there's not one way that this looks at the end. There's no picture I can give you and say, this right here, this is universal design for learning, because there's so many pictures that I could show you. And it's all about the perception of the learner. Are they owning what they're doing? Do they find value in what they're doing? Can they connect with it? And can they learn it in a way that's most appropriate and accessible to them and express it back in a way? And one of the questions that came up before that always comes up is this whole idea of standardized testing. And if we're always giving them opportunities to choose, they're not going to do very well on standardized tests. And I would very much push back on this, because a gritty, self-directed, creative problem solver who has had the opportunity to learn the content and the skills based on the standards is going to do better on any test than a child who was given an inaccessible education that was just focused on content and skills, because we don't know what that test's going to look like. Every year the questions are asked differently, and it's different texts that they have to read. And obviously we're working really hard as a nation, or a CAST especially, to try to get standardized tests to be more universally designed. But until we catch up to there, the best thing we can do is to teach our students how to be creative, to take a question and to say, gosh, I don't really know the answer to this, but let me try to solve the problem. Let me try to think about the task and the purpose and what the audience is looking for. And let me think back to some of the strategies my teachers gave me as an option, and I'm going to apply some of those here. Another question that someone asked is, what if a student really needs to improve her writing, but she always chooses something other than writing? And that comes back for the standards. There are whatever you want to call them, either Common Core or state frameworks or college and career ready standards. They say that students have to write. If that's the outcome of the lesson, students are writing. And maybe they're writing on an iPad, or maybe they're writing a poem, or maybe they're writing a screenplay. But it does always come down to what is the goal. And UDL at its core is still a standards-based curriculum design. And we need students to meet those standards in ways that are most relevant and valuable to them. And so a student, if she doesn't like to write, when we're working on content standards, then she doesn't have to write, because this is a way for her to cope and to really get that knowledge down and to understand the content. So when it's time to write about it, the content is like, she owns it. Like, that kid knows the content back and forth. And now she can focus on the process of writing, using the options you give her, like exemplars and graphic organizers, and the ability to be in a small group with you in front of the class. And so there's always ways to create an environment where there are options that will lead every learner to the same destination. although it's going to take them different amount of time to get there, and they might need to learn it in different ways and give it back in different ways. But that destination, that's the core, and that's what we need to focus on. So I would love to answer any other questions you have about either, a reflection or an aha moment or something that you would like from me or from Cass in the future that would help to guide you on your journey. And so we have 10 minutes for these questions. So I'm looking here. It talks about, in trying to get the word out about UDL from a very small group of staff, how would you convince teachers this work is worth their time and effort? And I would say be allies for the student and have the students in the classes where the teachers are universally designing speak to the staff. Because it's very hard for us to speak on behalf of students saying this is the best thing for them. But if you can have students, even very, very young learners, come and to share their work and what they accomplished, and you do that at a staff meeting, and you have the, this is a great thing on so many different levels, because you can get the parents of those kids kind of psyched, like they're being asked to present to the staff, and it's going to be really special, and the kids can get an award. It's very motivating. But also giving them the opportunity to teach teachers is something that I feel that would be a really great next step. And if you can't get them there, then to show their work. Thinking about things like instructional rounds is another great first step, is getting other teachers in the classrooms of the teachers that are doing it, to see like, wow, this is so cool. I can take that. And, this is a little bit different than I thought it was. And again, really appreciating the fact that the students, or the teachers who don't think it's worth their time and effort just haven't learned that it's important yet. They don't see the benefit yet. And so you have to think about, if your goal is they need to see the benefit, how are they going to see the benefit? And that's a product. So what product can you show them? Because we could talk about it until we're blue in the face, like this is really great. And you're going to have, based on variability, some people who are, psyched really quickly. And some other people are going to say, you know what, I need an exemplar. I need to see a lesson. You got to scaffold this a little bit for me. And so do it. Think of them as learners, and we do whatever we can as administrators and give them lots of options. So in my district, we provided book clubs. We provided a multi-part series. I taught a graduate course. We're doing instructional rounds. There's book clubs. And there's all these options to say, here, here's all of the options for you to learn about it. And as it's building, as the snowball is kind of rolling down the hill, and my colleagues are posting what they're doing on Twitter, and kids are starting to talk about it, going to other teachers' classrooms and being like, oh, we just did the coolest projects. They're keeping the movement going. And so it's really powerful to think about, what evidence can you show them that you can still meet these rigorous standards in ways that are far more accessible and far more engaging for students. Another question is, how do we come more open to recognizing barriers? And again, I think that comes down to protocols that minimize the threat and distraction of sharing what's not working. I always use, if you've ever done PD in person with me, I always kind of say, you want to think about these two little cartoons on your shoulder. And you have this one cartoon who thinks everything is awesome about UDL, and they love it. They think it's the greatest thing of all time. And they're like, yes, like let's transform the district tomorrow. I'm all in, let's do it. And then you have this other, like that's the bad one. That's the angel or the devil on the shoulder, however you want to characterize it, the most negative person you know. And they're saying, this will never work. We don't have the time. We don't have the resources. And once you can get those things in writing, that's when the magic comes, because then you start to get really creative, self-directed, and problem solving. And you're like, okay, so how can we get more time? We say we don't have more time, but how can we get more time? School calendars are alterable. Collectively bargained contracts are alterable. If you have an integrated and sustainable plan to get more time, you can get more time. And so it's all about, you have to know what the goal is. And so you say, these are the barriers. My goal is to eliminate those barriers. And then you create a plan with a bunch of different options to say, these are all the ways that we can get more time, or these are all the ways I can think of that we can get more feedback from students. It always starts with that conversation, and really great UDL implementation work always starts with UDL implementation, whereas we're modeling the importance of saying, yes, there are barriers. I hear you. I want to eliminate those barriers for you. And so me as an administrator, let's think about how we could do this. And now a group of a staff, they become students and they start saying, oh, what about this? What about this? And it's really amazing what collective groups of people can come up with to solve problems when there is a culture that taking risks is encouraged and that failure is okay, that bad ideas are okay. And maybe we're going to try this and it's going to be horrible. You know what? And that's fine. I'll own it. I'll own it for you because that's how much I want you to do it. So the other questions here is, goodness gracious, they are popping up like popcorn here. How do you implement UDL in a skill-based classroom like a writing class? And again, it comes down to the standards, is you have to look at your standards. If you're teaching math and it's like students have to be able to graph, a slope-intercept formula, that's a non-negotiable. That's what they're doing. And so then you start thinking about, okay, so how do I make this more valuable? And so I had a math teacher that I worked with that said they wanted the students to use the slope-intercept formula to figure out a bunch of things they wanted to buy. And so they brought in, all those Target catalogs that come out during the holidays. And it says, think of all the things you want to buy in here, make your list of things you want to buy. And the kids are like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And then it was like, okay, now you have to figure out how much they would be with, tax and all of that. And now you have to find a job that you could realistically get. So here's a couple, ads in the paper for like a soccer referee or whatever it is. And now you have to use the slope-intercept formula to figure out how long you have to work to get everything that you need, knowing what they're going to take out in taxes. And they get to work in groups. And something like that becomes so much more engaging than giving the kids a worksheet about slope-intercept formula, because they're all trying to figure it out. And at the end, they're like, why would anyone work? This is silly. And I was like, oh, okay. So, to have those opportunities. So in writing, if the goal is writing, make the writing relevant. All writing has a beginning and a middle and an end. Whether it's in response to a Shakespearean novel or whether it's in response to the fact that you had really bad service at a restaurant last night. You're still gleaning evidence from text of, I'm going to look at the menu to see what I ordered and how much it was. I need to know the woman's name. Every piece of writing has rhetorical strategies. There's always some manipulation happening in any piece of writing. You're trying to, entertain the writer or persuade the writer or inform the writer by using particular words. There's always an agenda. You can start to think about that and to say, like, being a really great writer is like more about getting what you want from life. And it's awesome. And selling kids on the relevance, all of these skills are relevant. Groups of educators come together and say, these are important skills. And most of the standards are becoming far more skill-based because, again, we're moving out of that information age into more of this creativity age. And it's not so much where I can look up the information, especially with this fake news explosion, but how do I know if it's accurate? And what do I do with it once I have it? And so UDL is like really at the beginning of this amazing explosion in education, whereas even though it's been around for 30 years, it's the most timely thing that we have. And so I think moving on, the important thing is finding a first step based on the feedback of your stakeholders of where's a space where they're really having trouble and how can you eliminate that by moving forward. And again, I don't have time to answer any more of these questions, but moving on, what you can definitely do is you can get in touch with me or you can get in touch with CAST at any time. My website is there. You can reach me on Twitter. There's CAST's website. Again, as a reminder, they have the big sale, big blowout sale on UDL books, 20% off with the code Katie. And if you have any questions and you'd like to follow up with me, I'm absolutely happy to answer them. I'm happy to connect. I'm happy to talk. Also, CAST, there's a whole professional cadre of people who are great resources to answer questions based on your area of focus and where you're at. And so it's a really amazing group where I have plenty of colleagues where if I can't answer the questions, there's going to be someone at CAST who I can point you to who's going to give you a really great answer. Because again, as an expert learner, I know sometimes that the best way to help you is to pass you on to another resource. So David, are you coming back on to do the grand finale here? Because we're down to a minute left on Apple time.
Can you bring me down video there? Okay. Hi, everyone. Wasn't that terrific? Okay, so, and I just shared with you also a link. I want to invite any of you prospective authors out there that want to be the next Katie Novak to send me a note with your book idea, and we'd love to have a look at it as well. So Get the books, share your ideas with us. I understand you'll be getting an email with this entire presentation, so it's been recorded and you'll be able to go back and look at it. And we thank you so much for joining us. And we have a wonderful saying here about time you get back when things end early, and it's called found time. So we're giving you 1 minute.
1 minute.
Of found time. So enjoy. Thanks for joining us, and all the best. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.